Hello everyone and welcome to this live chat panel session at the end of day one of the iCatConnect event. It's fantastic to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. As you probably guessed, I'm not Lindsay Quinlan, as Vicky suggested would be hosting this panel session today. I'm Harry Eckman. Unfortunately, Lindsay isn't available and able to be with us live today, but she is online and she's helping field the chats and the comments. I hope you've enjoyed today's event. It's been absolutely fascinating and really interesting to have so many speakers and experts from around the world share all of this information. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be joined by a fantastic panel of guests here to field some of your questions. Let me introduce, first of all, needs no introduction. Everybody hopefully knows Vicky Halls, who is our very own head of Unowned Cats here at International Cat Care. Sitting next to Vicky is Sarah Ellis, also International Cat Care's head of mental well-being and welfare. Online, we've got Dr. Elly Hiby, who is the director of the International Companion Animal Management Coalition. Hello, Elly. We've got Dr. Gemma, who is project manager for the Keeping Cats Safer at Home project at RSPCA New South Wales, Australia. And then Adelle Goodman, who is the director of Travel Animal Rescue. And I, of course, Harry Eckman, global advisor for cat population management here at International Cat Care. So as I said, next 30 minutes, we're going to be answering some of your questions. So why don't we crack on and start doing that? The first question is for you, Sarah. So let's see what we have. So you mentioned in your presentation that cats are both predators and prey. And you mentioned, I think it was coyotes in the United States. So what about humans? What about people? Could cats also think that we're a threat?
Yeah, absolutely. Really good question. I think there are those people that are intentionally threatening to cats, and that's never great. You know, those people who antagonize them by chasing, hitting, etc. But there's also those people who unintentionally are threatening to cats. And that might be the way that they behave. They are too loud, they're pursuing the cat, they want to pick it up, cuddle it. It's not something that the cat enjoys at all. They're not considering those cat-specific needs, what makes the cat the cat. Mm. But there's also those people who are doing everything right, you know, that they're really respectful, they're taking into consideration the cat's needs, but yet the cat still finds them threatening. And that boils down to then not the person, but the cat and the cat's perception. And it really relates to their temperament and the socialization that they've had. And if they haven't been well socialized, they won't necessarily see people, regardless of what form they come in, as approachable. They're more likely to see them threatening generally. So yeah, intentional, unintentional, definitely a lot going on. It really boils down to how sociable that cat is and what socialization it's had in that early period of its life.
And that goes back to obviously the presentation at the very beginning of today about, you know, underpinning the cat-friendly principles and really looking at the cat in that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question is for you, Vicky. So in your presentation, you said that people shouldn't do one-off TNR for cats. But doesn't this still make a difference if people are doing one-off here and there?
Yes, of course. I hope that's not how it came across. I was saying don't do one-off TNR. I think what I'm really saying is if you do TNR for one or two cats at a time, you're making a massive difference to those particular cats. It's when you start talking about the population as a whole that you then realise, actually, I am not impacting on the population. I am literally, you've got that leaky bucket, you know, more cats are coming into that leaky bucket and you're just sort of mopping up bits and pieces here and there. So for anyone who's doing that, I would say you're doing an amazing job, but think if there's any possibility for you to pool your resources, pool your talent in what you do, which is trapping those cats, and work with other people within your community who are doing the similar thing, because collaboration is where you get these really positive, impactful TNR programs. Yeah. So I'm certainly not saying that they're wasting their time. The people who are, the cats they're impacting upon are very grateful, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's such an important point, you know, people working within their capacity, but recognising what you can do and can't do, and collaboration absolutely is key. Elly, The next question is for you. Many studies show the importance of controlling the environment's carrying capacity to decrease feral roaming cat populations. So the question is, how is this done in the field? We can't just ask caretakers to stop feeding them. So how would we deal with that?
Do you know, I really enjoy this question because they're absolutely right. That concept of reducing carrying capacity to decrease populations, whether that be cats or dogs or rats or mice, it's repeated in many places in the literature. And I think this is a perfect example of us evolving for cats, because I feel we're past using that as a method of population management, at least at that population level. So I'm going to dwell for a moment on what that actually means. So carrying capacity is mostly dictated by food availability. So you reduce food, and now the cats may move somewhere else to find alternative food sources, which might be okay. So you can use sort of local carrying capacity manipulation. For example, moving cats from an area of high conflict by removing food sources just there. But if there aren't any alternatives, they essentially start to suffer from malnutrition and eventually starvation. Some pregnancies might fail, you might get smaller litter sizes if embryo resorption happens. Basically, the mother's malnutrition state means her body decides that a big litter is not feasible and aborts the fetuses. But also then you get higher kitten mortality and then also adults. So at its most basic level, to reduce a population, you increase mortality or death, or you decrease birth. Now, those of us in that business of humane management, we don't like using death. We would much prefer to limit birth through processes like TNR. You can also work, of course, on emigration and immigration to the free roaming cat population. So immigration is most obviously abandonment of owned animals, and emigration is when we increase rehoming of those individuals that are suitable as pets, remembering our spectrum of cat lifestyles. But I feel that really we should just stay away from that carrying capacity manipulation, especially on that sort of broader spectrum, that broader scope. Also, it's really difficult for us to influence. So people will feed cats that are in front of them if they're obviously hungry. You sort of feel compelled to feed a hungry animal. But also, if you go down to the local municipality department that's in charge of solid waste management, and you said to them, did you know if you pick up more waste, there will be less cats? They will probably turn around to you and say, yes. There'd also be a number of other benefits too. There's so many positive impacts of solid waste management. They're basically doing the best they can. It's one of those services that basically improves with time, with development, with urban development in particular. And our job in that sort of cat population management space is to make sure our cat populations are below carrying capacity when that solid waste management does improve by decreasing birth, decreasing immigration through abandonment or loss, and increasing emigration through rehoming when that's suitable for that individual cat, and not through increasing death through through changing carrying capacity. Apologies, I'm sure that this is the audience that will forgive this type of interruption.
I'm sure they will. The carrying capacity of your desk there is obviously suitable for at least one cat. But thank you, Elly. It's a question that is, it requires a very complex and nuanced answer. It's not as simple as so many of these things are. Thanks for that. The next question is for Gemma. So the question here says, I do TNR in my local community. Can you go through again what the indicators are that I could look for to show my impact? I get loads of people telling me how great the cats look and what difference I've made, and obviously I know how many cats I've neutered, but what else could you suggest?
Yeah, I think there's not much that's more satisfying than seeing a population of cats get nice and fat and shiny and healthy as you start to do these TNR programs. I think a good place to start is to think about why you started doing TNR in the first place. Was it because the cats were sick? Was it because heaps of kittens were coming into care? I think figuring out that reason why can help you pick which of the indicators that are most relevant to you. I think if you're doing colony tracking, like Elly talked about in her presentation, you can pull a whole bunch of different indicators out of that. One obvious one is the overall number of cats in your colonies, but you could also look at the proportion of the cats that are neutered or the proportion of cats that are sick. It kind of depends what's going to be most relevant to why you're doing TNR in the first place.
Thanks, Gemma. I mean, that root of why is so important to this, to really be able to understand and be able to pick those measures that are relevant, and they're probably going to be different in different places. So it's really key to be able to answer that question. Adelle, we have a question for you. It's an interesting one. How can we get consensus regarding the decision to spay a pregnant cat? Is there any compelling argument that works for you in your experience?
So I find it varies hugely based on where you are and what the thoughts on pregnant spay is. But the most widely compelling point I found is this cat may actually not be pregnant. They may be suffering from something else, such as pyometra, which is infection in the uterus, which is fatal. They may be struggling with parasites. They may be struggling with a belly full of fluid from FIP. So they may look pregnant, but they may not, and we may be saving their life by taking them in. Now, if they are indeed pregnant, we know this cat, we know they're not spayed, we know it's been around 2 months, and they've been getting larger and larger. I would generally point out that there is so much potential for death and suffering after birth. We know, based on statistics from the US, that approximately 70% of kittens born outside will die. And that could be either immediately after birth, or they may not even make it to birth. Cats can be impregnated at different times, and therefore the fetuses could be at different stages of development within the same cat, or they may even not be able to be born. So just because we let a pregnancy come to term, it doesn't mean those individuals are going to live. And of course, those of us who are in the field so frequently, we are confronted with the sheer amount of death and suffering that happens to especially vulnerable kittens. And I think we can make, based on all of that experience, a quite compelling case that it can be much more compassionate to terminate a pregnancy rather than let a birth happen.
Thanks, Adelle. This is one of those questions that, you know, is really important to be able to talk about and have this kind of dialogue, because it's one of those subjects that, you know, often gets a much more emotional response than others. And so being able to, you know, really hold the welfare of cats paramount in this when you're talking about this is so important. Thanks for that answer. There's a question for me. Oh, it's about strategy. Oh, that's good. I've never done anything strategic in my life. Your presentation sounded terrifying. Any suggestions for people like me who are very good at trapping cats but definitely don't see themselves as strategic thinkers? This is such a good question because this is so relevant to so many people that I'm sure are involved in this line of work. And to that, I would say that actually you don't realize it, but you're already a strategic thinker. Everybody is a strategic thinker. Take something as simple and mundane as making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. To do that, you are instinctively thinking strategically. You want to make the end result of whatever it is you're doing is to have a cup of tea in front of you or a cup of coffee. So strategically, you need a cup, you need tea, you need to boil the kettle, you need to go through this process, this sequential process to get the results that you want. This is something we do every day when we're prepping a meal, when we're planning out our day. We are all strategic. It's really just demystifying this idea of strategy being something terrifying and distant. It isn't. We're instinctively strategic people when we're doing stuff. It's just taking that mindset and thinking more systematically and strategically about cat population management. And it's not as hard as you would think. But great question. Back to you, Sarah. So we've got another one for you. If cats need to be high up and we have to use shoreline pods in our shelter, would you recommend giving cats a portal to a cage higher up rather than alongside?
Great question. I think the first thing, it's not if cats need to be high up, it's that we should give every cat the opportunity to be high up. Because if we think back to what a cat is and its coping strategies when it's faced with something that it feels potentially frightening or it's feeling anxious, one of those strategies is to get away from that thing. And very often they'll choose to get up high. Remember, we talked about them being a prey species, one of their predators being coyotes. If they can get up high, up a tree, then they're getting themselves safe. They can also see everything from a really high vantage point, so their vigilance works much, much better. So I think it's an opportunity that we should offer every cat. But depending on where that cat is, so for example in a shoreline cage, we might have to be a little bit imaginative about how we can provide that opportunity. So I really, really like this question, because when we do think about increasing space, particularly in cats that are caged or in pens, we often think about the floor space and not necessarily that three-dimensional space. So we'll often put a portal into the cage next door so that they can have two areas on the same horizontal plane. But actually thinking about going up and giving them the space in that three-dimensional, that vertical space, is a really great idea. It can allow them to get up higher so they can get that vantage point that we were talking about in terms of scanning the environment outside of the cage and feeling higher off the ground. They'll feel a bit safer. But I think in addition to that, we need to be quite clever and quite imaginative in that even though we give them the opportunity to get higher off the ground that we stand on, that second cage that's stacked above the first still has a floor in it. Yeah, it's only the portal that they come through. And so when they go into that higher cage, they're still standing on the floor. So they're not necessarily going to feel that they're up high when they're looking at the surroundings of inside the cage. They will outside, but not necessarily inside. So we need to add in another layer of sort of architecture, if you like, and that's thinking about how can we then give them the opportunity to get those paws off the floor and up high within that higher cage. And there's a number of ways we can do that. You know, we can offer these little lovely, very low cost plastic stools, that little sort of children's stools, or those that we use to step up ourselves to reach cupboards, etc. We can put those in so they can get up and they can perch. We can use cardboard boxes that have a tray that sits on the top that they can sort of hide a little bit under, even better, because it increases their perceived safety. And for those who have cages that allow fixtures and fittings to put in, we can add shelves, perches, hammocks. Even for those that are maybe stainless steel and we don't have that opportunity to attach things physically to them, we can add in freestanding structures that still allow the shelves and the perches and the hammocks. So great question.
It really is. And it's some really great practical ways of doing that. People can kind of be creative and find different opportunities to do that. And again, love the fact that this roots back to the cat-friendly principles again, and really just kind of recognizing what cats need. Vicky, back to you again. Regarding humane population management, are there any resources for existing rescue centres to expand to be able to learn and start to effectively, safely carry out TNR? And second to that, is it a regulated practice?
Okay, that second part first. It depends on where you are in the world. In most parts of the world it is not a regulated practice, in some parts of the world it is illegal. But taking the first part, I love this question because this shows that somebody's really thinking bigger picture stuff. And they're thinking, yes, we can rescue, we can continue doing that part of our work, but how do we stem the flow of the cats that we need to rescue, which leads you to thinking about humane population management. And I would say, firstly, that's really what iCatCare are all about, providing the right information for people who need to do the right thing with regard to any of their work with and for cats. So joining, we've been talking to people on the chat throughout the event today, joining our Unowned Cat Community membership, which is free. There's going to be lots of resources there, and every single presentation that people have seen today, all the resources relevant to that presentation will be available for people to download. And there are some fantastic resources, not just from us, but from other organisations across the world. So we've tried to sort of get a library going of all good stuff from all different people, so that everyone gets a good overview. And of course, there's learning opportunities with international cat care, and we're going to be talking about that a lot to those people who've registered and are watching this event in the next few weeks, about how they can embrace new learning, work with us. We've got some great coaching programs, and the great thing about our coaching program is it's tailored for each individual rescue centre. So if a rescue centre came along to us and said, we really want to look at the TNR requirements, the cat population management requirements in our community, that's what we focus the programme on for them. So it's tailored for them. All this information will come through to them via the Unowned Cat. It's a bit of a plug here. The Unowned Cat Community membership. We hope people will join us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll, in the wrap up today, we'll give a little bit more information about the Community Cat Membership Hub, and give people the opportunity to access these amazing resources. Now we have another question for Elly. Why isn't there more evidence to support the fact that TNR works? So many governments won't support it because they say it doesn't work. It's a really good question.
It is a good question, and I have 3 parts to my answer. And the first is, what did they mean by work? So did someone tell the government that TNR would mean there'd be 0 cats on the streets after about a year, in which case they were sold a lie? And it's not uncommon for us to overpromise when we're trying to convince someone like a government to support this work. So TNR does work if work means population reduction, but it does take time and it needs to be sustained. So I see population management as this sort of set of services that needs to be sustained for the long term. It's not a short-term solving of a problem and then we can stop and move on to something else. Whenever we have people owning and enjoying cats, we will need services to manage their numbers. So it's not something that just disappears once you've finished. My second point would be, sometimes it doesn't work to reduce numbers if the coverage wasn't high enough, and also if only TNR was used and nothing was done about the owned cats, and the abandonment and loss from the owned population continued. So all the benefits, all the reduction that was achieved through TNR was basically negated by continued immigration to the population, to the free roaming population from the households. That's why sometimes it doesn't work. Number 3 is that there isn't more evidence because we haven't collected it and we haven't shared it. So I think the onus really has to come to us, those of us who do TNR and support it, to do better at collecting that data. So in my talk earlier today, I talked about using some very simple indicators that you collect on hotspot routes. It can be as little as 1 survey once per year using a consistent method repeated over time. That's the most basic, and I think all of us can do that. So I think really we need to kind of consider this question as a bit of a rallying cry. We need to build that evidence base to show that there are places where TNR done well, and as part of that puzzle that Vicky talked about earlier, can lead to reductions in the population and reductions in things like nuisance complaints and so on as well.
No, absolutely. It's such a good answer there, Elly. And, you know, you're absolutely right. We do need to do a better job of it. Everybody that we speak to, that we know this in this community, has anecdotal stories of where welfare has increased, community complaints have reduced, numbers have reduced, but we're not capturing it in a way that is evidence to these governments. And also your point about TNR, you know, TNR isn't this panacea, it's not this cure-all. TNR is a tool within cat population management, and we have to recognise that if we just focus on TNR, as you said, we're going to be missing out on these other things and it's not going to be as effective. Thank you so much for that answer, for a very good question. Gemma, kind of touched on by something that Elly said, Vicky said, which is TNR is technically illegal in Australia. So how are you able to manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The general rhetoric is that TNR is illegal everywhere in Australia, but how that's actually written into legislation varies a lot between all the different states. So where I am based in New South Wales, it's under our animal welfare legislation where it's an offence to abandon an animal. So returning a cat in a TNR program can be considered abandonment. It makes it really tricky to do unowned cat management in Australia, and it means we have to do it in quite a different way. So every cat that goes through our programs have to be owned cats. So we have to put a lot of legwork into the community engagement piece to find owners for these cats, to find people who are going to be responsible for them for the rest of their lives. It makes it tricky, but it does also make our programs better, I think, in some ways. But it is definitely a tricky landscape to work in Australia.
Yeah, it's really difficult to be able. It's great that you've been able to navigate around that. Thank you for that answer, for being able to highlight the specifics of Australia. Adelle, we have a question for you now. Talks about the panel discussion. But it says the question is, it raises some very difficult issues, more difficult issues, as it sounds like tough life and death decisions that we have to make sometimes. This person is saying they just don't feel qualified to make them. So should they leave it to their vet decide on these kinds of decisions?
So globally, we can see how veterinary education and standards are different in different places. For example, I'm in Greece. And in a lot of cases, we may not be able to rely totally on vets to make decisions, especially as we are the ones who initiated and took responsibility for overseeing the intervention. And we were the ones who met the cat in the beginning, and we have information to relay to the vets. So in that case, if we are performing an intervention, I would say we should be prepared to firstly make an effort to find the best vets possible. And that requires being informed advocates. It means learning and trying to be up to date on best practices, learning from international standards and other organizations. And I would say also there's a role to play of community decision making. So not taking that burden on as just an individual, looking to the vets to discuss things, and looking outside of vets to other people in our community, or potentially field workers and project managers in other parts of the world who do have this experience to help us make decisions. A lot of us have learned through trial and error, and there's no need to repeat mistakes if we can reach out and speak to others and learn from others' mistakes. There is a lot of education available online. CC, obviously. Battersea has resources. Cats is a good resource in the US. There's all different kinds of TNR training, information on return to field programs, community care, seminars. So I think taking responsibility to try to be an advocate, but also recognizing we don't have to be the sole decision maker, and therefore trying to make sure we are connected with a community of people who can help us make those decisions.
That's a great answer, Adelle. Thank you. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is collaboration and being part of a community. And often, people that work in this line of work, you feel like you've got to take all the responsibility and the burden on yourself and be able to answer everything. But there's expertise and support and resources out there that can help with some of these decision-making processes. So we have a question for me now, which again is linked to Elly's question before about the carrying capacity, which is, what is the role of people that feed cats? And that's actually another really interesting question, because feeding cats is... cat feeders are kind of part of the equation with cat population management. They are often seen as part of the problem, and many complaints are not necessarily about the cats, but about the feeders themselves. And people, from a human behavior point of view, will always want to feed cats. Elly kind of mentioned this as well. There's always people that want to feed cats. So what we need to do is not think of people feeding cats as a problem, but find a way of having them as solutions, because they can be advocates for what we want them to do. They're the people on the ground that can monitor the colonies. They can make sure that TNR programs are more effective and efficient. They can be champions in the community rather than people who are being part of the problem. So feeders need to be brought in and not ostracized as much as they are. We need to find ways of having them part of this solution. Apologies, the iPad here with all the questions on seems to have died again, but I think I have the paper version over there. Thank you very much. Always rely on paper. Let's see what we've got here. Going to have to go for the reading glasses again. Excuse me while we have a bit of a live catch up. So that was me. And so the next question goes back to Sarah. I was really interested in the way that you described a cat's strategies in the face of danger. I'm worried now that cats that I thought were okay were actually frozen in fear. So where would you recommend that I go to learn more about cat behaviour that will give me other views and the basics?
Okay, first of all, I would say don't worry. We're all learning, all of us, every day, so please don't worry. But I think watching cats is probably one of my favourite things to do. I absolutely love it, and that's what does make every day a school day for me. There's a number of things you can do in terms of formal training and learning in that kind of structured way. But also I'm going to suggest some other ways of learning where you maybe don't need to take part in a course as well. So three things to remember. The first I would say is obviously our Cat-Friendly Homing Foundations course, which is a free online course, has lots of information in there about how to read behaviour and body language, how to understand what that means in terms of how that cat is feeling, thinking about what emotions it might be feeling. The other place, if you want to go into a sort of deeper dive and really get to practice that skill and have feedback on that skill from tutors, is our Cat Behavioural Health Programme. You can look on our website under our courses and you'll find out about that. But we have specific modules on learning all about behaviour, body language, postures, how to make emotional inferences, because of course we never know exactly how they're feeling. We can only hypothesize. And it's not just looking at their behaviour and body language. We need to take into consideration what we know about that individual and the context that it's in at that particular time. So if you're into learning in a structured way and getting feedback, they're great courses. But if that's not your thing, I would say just go out and start watching cats. Look at the cats that you are in your environment, whether that's a homing centre, whether that's out free ranging, whether that's in a home. But also, I believe the cat is the biggest animal on the internet. There is opportunity for all of us to watch cats, whether it's in real life or actually on our computer screens. And what I would really urge people to do as they are watching those cats is not just jump straight to, oh, he's anxious, he's fearful, but to say, what makes you think that? Why? Try and justify that and go, well, his skin was twitching, do that bit first. The skin was twitching, all his feet were on the ground, his pupils became dilated. Only once you've gathered all that information, think about the context he's in, think about if you know anything about that particular cat, what's happened before, what's happened during that situation, how old is he, all those elements. Only then should you really make an emotional deduction. And what I would say is, do that with friends, do that with colleagues. Go away, do it on your own, come back and discuss the results. See if you're the same, then do it together. Point out what you saw that maybe a colleague didn't, because I think that's where the learning really happens. Oh, I saw the ear flick, but did you not see the tail swish? No, I missed that. Let's watch that video again. So I think that's where collaboration can really help accelerate that learning.
That's great. And it's, we're seeing a theme to some of these answers now. And, it's similar to what we talked before, to the answer that Adelle gave before. It's, not everything is on the person. There is so much expertise out there. There's so much opportunity for us to work together to solve these things as a community. We have another question for Vicky. If you've got limited funds and you have to choose which cats to neuter, how do you choose? Another good question.
It is a very good question, and there are very few situations where people don't have limited funds of one sort or another. So I would say, for example, if your funds were limited insofar as you just could focus on one colony at a time, then I would focus on that colony, even though you may have lots of other cats in different colonies in your location, just focus on one. If your resources are even more limited than that, and let's say, for example, you have, you've trapped 2 cats, you know the veterinary capacity of your local vets is 1 more cat, one's a male, one's a female, then I prioritise the female. But certainly we've talked about the most effective and sustainable and efficient cat population management that shows a sort of stability and then reduction in the cat population. It's this magic sort of more than 75% of the population up front. So if that sounds, well, that is just ridiculously unachievable, you really do have to hone it down and focus on that group of cats before you move on to that group of cats. So there's always so many decisions. And can I just say, it's really interesting hearing you talk about really getting down into the granular of you and the cat, understanding the cat's behaviour. And then we go to questions that are so much bigger about the population. We're going up and down like that. It just shows you it's a big pat on the back to all those people who work in this sector, who are able to do that expanding and contracting, you know. It's quite extraordinary. It's been very relevant as we've talked today.
It really is. It's so interesting to hear how people are picking up on these things, and you know, it's really representative of the levels of work that people working within this community. I know that we're kind of approaching the time that we were supposed to have for the questions. I don't know if we want to kind of carry on with a few more. We have a few more questions. What do you... Should we have a few more? Should we have a few more? We're going to have a few more. All right, we got a few more. So the next one is for Elly. So this is an interesting one. Okay, so it's a comment, but it's worth exploring. So with the rapid growth of the pet market in China, the number of stray cats, including abandoned pets and community cats, has significantly increased. So wondering if you might be able to comment on the effect in a country experiencing this kind of change.
Well, that's a really interesting experience that someone's had there. So I think what we've got here in China in this example, but also it's happening in many other countries, is this sort of mismatch between the growth in the pet market and growth of the vet services and use of those services. So having more pets around isn't the problem if they're well looked after and they're managed by their owners. But in a country like this example is China, there needs to be significant controls of the pet selling market to protect the welfare of the animals involved, but also the owners, the consumers, who want healthy and well socialized cats as pets. But we also need significant investment in the growth of the small animal veterinary services, and that comes down to training within the vet schools, but also, you know, urban centres in particular should be doing what they can to encourage new clinics to set up. So, for example, they could give lower business rates for vet clinics to encourage them to set up business in their areas. And there also, of course, needs to be greater regulation and promotion of that, you know, all important responsible ownership. So that idea of keeping pets for life, keeping them in the way that maintains a good quality of life, and taking responsibility for the pet's entire lifespan and the lifespan of their offspring, of their kittens. And we also need to see growth in some of those additional systems that really support people to be responsible owners, like microchipping and registration, so that cats that are lost can actually get returned to their owners. Mars did a study a little while back that was called The State of Pet Homelessness, and they found that in China, of those owners that had lost a cat, only 19% got their lost pet cat back. And we know it's much simpler and cheaper to get an animal reunited than it is to get it rehomed. So we really do also need to see growth in systems like that to enable that responsible pet ownership to be possible. So it's not unique to China. There are many countries that have seen this increase in in pet ownership and the pet market is the quickest part of the equation to respond. Now we need everything else to grow as well, including those vet services and those additional things like microchipping and registration.
It's so interesting. Thank you, Elly. It's so interesting to kind of look at where different countries are on this kind of path of pet ownership and controlling cat populations and animal populations. And, you know, it goes back to that earlier conversation that we were having about what cat population management is and the different place and the different tools and the way in which you use them depending on the environment. Thank you. We are actually out of time now for the Q&A. So a little bit of housekeeping before we wrap up for the day. Let's bring it back to what Vicky was talking about just before, which is our free Unowned Cat community membership. So we've heard a little bit about this today. So joining the membership, joining the hub, having access to these amazing resources is going to bring a global community together. All of us that care about cats and their welfare and doing the best for them, there is this amazing resource that you will now have access to. Some of the benefits, I mean, we already touched on them, but it's really significant. All of the content from iCatConnect, continued professional development, certification from this event is all going to be available online on the membership from the 18th of November. And there's going to be translations currently in Spanish, Portuguese and Greek also coming soon. We've got access to flexible online courses and webinars and on-demand learning. There's going to be e-newsletters. You can sign up to the e-newsletter, which is a bi-monthly newsletter, but on the portal, on the membership hub, there is also going to be the library of all the previous emails and e-newsletters, having access to that full archive, inspiring stories, updates from people working on unowned cat issues around the world. And of course, there's educational resources, including guidelines and tools and infographics and the kinds of things that we've been talking about today at your fingertips. So you will have access to this. Check your email. If you haven't already signed up for it or registered for it, you can check your emails. Please check your spam box as well, just in case it ends up there over the next few days on how to join the community, the Unowned Cat Community membership. And there'll also be information on how to navigate the hub as well. Also in these emails, in the email that you get in the next couple of days, there's going to be a link to a post-event survey. And we'd really appreciate it if you would fill that in and give us feedback so we can work out how to evolve this event and make it even more exciting and even more accessible to people when we next do it. And that's pretty much it for day one. All that's left for me to do now is to thank a bunch of people. So first of all, I want to thank Vicky and Sarah here in the studio, and obviously Elly, Adelle and Gemma over there in Zoomland, wherever you are. Thank you so much for participating today. I want to thank the comms team here at International Cat Care and the production company ProLive that have helped put this together, as well as Battersea for supporting this event. And of course, most importantly, I want to thank all of you out there for joining us today. Over 3,000 people have registered for this event in more than 100 countries. This is truly a global event. Thank you so much for making this such a fantastic day. Please join us tomorrow for day 2, where we'll be talking more about unowned cats, having expertise and panelists as well. So looking forward to seeing you there. Thanks again for joining us.